stories. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Obama administration's acknowledged it's continuing a Bush-era policy authorizing the killing of U.S. citizens abroad. The confirmation came from Director of National Intelligence Dennis Blair in congressional testimony last week. Blair told the House Intelligence Committee U.S. forces can assassinate Americans believed to be involved in terrorist activity against the United States. Blair said, quote, being a U.S. citizen will not spare an American from getting assassinated by military or intelligence operatives overseas if the individual is working with terrorists and planning to attack fellow Americans. He added, we don't target people for free speech. We target them for taking action that threatens Americans. Blair's comments came 1 week after the Washington Post reported at least 3 U.S. citizens are on hit lists maintained by the CIA and the Joint Special Operations Command. The most well-known target is the U.S.-born cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who is accused of having ties to the failed Christmas Day airline bombing and the shooting at Fort Hood. My first 2 guests have been among the most vocal critics of the continued assassination policy. Democratic Congressmember Dennis Kucinich joins us from Washington, D.C. Last week, he wrote a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder requesting an explanation of the Obama administration's legal basis for the extrajudicial killing of U.S. citizens. And we're joined on the telephone by Glenn Greenwald, a constitutional law attorney and political and legal blogger for Salon.com. He wrote a widely circulated piece for Salon last week called Presidential Assassinations of U.S. Citizens. Let's begin with Congressmember Dennis Kucinich. Explain what you wrote to Attorney General Holder.
Well, I think it's incumbent upon the Attorney General to explain the basis in law for such a policy. Our Constitution's Fifth Amendment, our Seventh Amendment, our 14th Amendment, all clearly provide legal protections for people who are accused or who would be sentenced after having been judged to be guilty. And what's happened is that the Constitution is being vitiated here. The idea that people are if their life is in jeopardy, legally have due process of law, is thrown out the window. And, Amy, when you consider that there are people who are claiming there are many terrorist cells in the United States, it doesn't take too much of a stretch to imagine that this policy could easily be transferred to citizens in this country. That only compounds what I think is a slow and steady detachment from core constitutional principles. And once that happens, we have a country then that loses its memory and its soul with respect to being disconnected from those core constitutional principles which are the basis of freedom in our society.
Glenn Greenwald, you've been writing about this extensively. Can you talk about your major objections and where you think this policy is going?
Well, first of all, look at the controversies that Democrats and progressives were so vocal about during the Bush years. They objected vehemently over the Bush administration's wiretapping of American citizens without any court warrants or judicial oversight. They objected when the Bush administration put not American citizens but foreign nationals into cages at Guantanamo merely on the say-so of the president that these people were terrorists. Here you're talking about the worst elements of those policies, but even more extreme. You're talking about American citizens not being merely wiretapped by the president with no oversight, but murdered, assassinated, killed, based solely on the unchecked say-so of the president. And I think what really has to be emphasized is look at how many times over the past decade that the administration, first the Bush administration and the Obama administration, has accused people of being terrorists, the worst of the worst, and it turned out that they were completely wrong. Hundreds of people who were at Guantanamo ended up being released because there was no evidence of wrongdoing. Ever since the Supreme Court in 2008 granted habeas corpus rights to detainees, 33 out of 39 Guantanamo detainees who brought their cases before a court were ordered released by federal judges on the grounds that there was no evidence to justify the accusations against them. So there are few things more dangerous than allowing the executive branch to label people terrorists and treat them accordingly, and that danger is compounded severely when you're talking about American citizens who have constitutional rights and talking about not merely eavesdropping on them or imprisoning them, but actually murdering them.
Glenn, you quote a 1981 executive order signed by Ronald Reagan.
Right. Well, you know, assassinations have a very long and sordid history in the United States, and the reason is that the CIA has used assassinations as a major weapon in its arsenal, so much so that they've assassinated people who ended up being wrongly killed, who ended up causing great controversy because it's extrajudicial killings, and even Ronald Reagan, who engaged in all sorts of extreme policies in Central America, waging covert war, declared political assassinations of political leaders, to be illegal. Now that applies only to political assassinations, not necessarily to assassinations of people accused of terrorism, but the principle is the same, that these kind of extrajudicial killings, which we condemn when virtually every other country does, was so extreme, so contrary to our values, that even Ronald Reagan issued an executive order banning it, and now here's President Obama doing it, again, not with regard to foreign nationals or to foreign leaders who we accuse of all kinds of extremities, but United States citizens, in the case of al-Awlaki, born and raised and educated in the United States, and it's as severe and extreme a policy as can be imagined.
So, Congressmember Dennis Kucinich, what can you do about this in Congress?
Well, Congress has the authority under a joint resolution to challenge any presidential directive. It's not widely known, Amy, but there are at least 3 states of national emergency that we're operating under right now by presidential declaration. One relating to 9/11, another one relating to the war on terror, and a third one relating to Iran. You know, this idea of being governed by an edict, of being locked into this war on terror, poses all kinds of challenges to our Constitution. Now, I take an oath to defend the Constitution, and when I see in the Fifth Amendment where it says that no one should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, I want to know what's the constitutional basis for suspending this provision for anyone, even for a moment. Because if this in any sense can be set aside, then we are on a slippery slope to anti-democracy. And I think that the reason why this is important for the Attorney General to reflect upon is that the President and all federal officials take an oath to defend that Constitution. This is the Constitution. If they're saying that the authorization for the use of military force passed after 9/11 is the basis for this action, we should know that they're saying that. But a fair reading of that said that it applied only to those who were involved in 9/11, not someone who joins an organization later on, no matter how misguided or wrong-headed that may be, that is seen to be a threat to the U.S., that someone can just say, well, you know, you're done, you're dead. You know, what about the right to be able to be told of the charges against you? What about the right to a trial? What about the right to be able to be presented by your accusers? This is a dangerous moment, and either I see it as a constitutional crisis, and Congress has to start stepping up to review these actions without regard to whether it's a Democrat or Republican administration.
Do you have support among your colleagues, Congressman Kucinich?
I just raised this issue in the last week, and it's been snowing here, so I'll be speaking to my colleagues about that when I see them. I'm here. I'm hopeful that this week there'll still be some sessions of Congress so we can begin the discussion.
Well, thank you for making your way into the studio today.